Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast is your one-stop shop for fantasy football news and advice. Can't decide on who to draft on the first round? Going gaga on how to line up your team. Got you covered. Traditional leagues, dynasty league, PPR league, IDP league, even daily fantasy football league. Join us as we break down all the questions of fantasy football. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast on the GSMC Podcast Network. It is your boy, it is your man, it's your guy with the Friday plan. It is Ethan here, talking all about fantasy football going on today, man. It's week 10. We're 3 weeks away from fantasy playoffs in most standardized league settings and all that jazz. And of course, you play daily fantasy. That doesn't really pertain to you, but it's week 10. A lot of things have moved along. A lot of pieces are either hurt or could be hurt, and a lot of things have moved and changed. So, we have to discuss that. So we're going to definitely get into, some matchup mania a little bit later, and we're going to talk all about what's been going on fantasy-wise and do a little bit of a daily fantasy sports special I'm going to call the $2 Special Roni. There we go. The $2 Special Roni. Trademarked. Not really. Could be. Should be. Maybe. I'll get back to you on that. But the $2 Special Roni is going to be where I do some two-baller. It will be $2 when I get $2 bets going on. That's when I'm going to be doing some $2 placement bets on Monkey Knife Fight, the latest and greatest daily fantasy playing sports app that I find to be the most fun and compelling and as close to traditional sports gambling as you possibly can be, while also being involved fully in the fantasy element. So that's what we're going to be doing for the majority of the day. But first, we have to go ahead and talk about where I am in my leagues, where my teams are at. Week 10, it's starting to come all the way together, isn't it? So in my Yahoo League, we'll start there. I am 5-4, 6 out of 10 in the conference, or in the league, I should say, because there's no divisions. My team has basically stayed the same. I haven't really changed much at all. I don't really pick up guys off waivers. I did do a little bit of tight end picking up back and forth, but I ended up with Jared Cook all along anyway, who, Jared Cook had a nice game last year against San Francisco before he got knocked out of the game. So that might be another matchup where you may want to look and say, oh, that might be something to watch out for. Keep in mind, San Francisco is not is his definition of banged up as you can be. So that right there, this should be a really promising game for the New Orleans Saints offense. But we've seen how sure things end up in the first place. So take it as you will. But Russell Wilson is still my quarterback, and he's still my captain of the team, so to speak. Stephon Diggs is my wide receiver, who has been everything for me as far as wide receivers go. Justin Jefferson is my number 2, which is not great. But Amari Cooper would be starting currently, but he is on bye. So it would either be Justin Jefferson or Jarvis Landry. LSU guys all over the place. But honestly, I might switch that up right now, live on the pod. I'm going to put in Jarvis just because Justin Jefferson, the way that Dalvin Cook is playing currently, is just he's too good. He's too good. You don't need to throw the ball. And if you don't need to throw the ball, then you saw last week, Kirk Cousins only had 24 pass attempts. That is not a lot of passes to go around. And when you throw to your tight end, for 2 touchdowns on only a few targets that were unsustainable, that's all you can do. You just got to hold on. Justin Jefferson obviously is a wonderful talent, Really good route running ability. He's shown up a lot in key moments for that team, although it hasn't really translated into wins just yet. But that's not really his fault. But this is fantasy football, and we have to do what is best for our own squads, as we know. At my running back 1, I have Josh Jacobs, who had a really good game last week. His first good game in a long time. And I have Miles Sanders back. So Miles Sanders is back going up against the New York Giants. Healthy. Wonderful. So 2 of my really strong players here, bell cows, so to speak, going at it, man. It's just gonna take it to people. And then, of course, I said Jared Cook. And I have Leonard Fournette in my flex spot doing great things. Leonard Fournette. He's the pass catching back of choice for Tampa Bay. And it's funny how I have Leonard Fournette in one league and I have Mr. Ronald Jones II in another. And it hurts. I'd much rather have Leonard Fournette in both at this point, because Ronald Jones, he just gets game scripted out of stuff, but you can't not start him, because if Tampa Bay controls the tempo of the game, Ronald Jones gets more touches, gets the goal line touches at that. That's easy money. It's just the fact of the matter is, if they're playing from behind, he is literally definition of game script. He didn't see the field, I think, after the middle of the first quarter. He was done. That's no bueno. Not good. Mr. Myers and I'm not talking about Mr. Myers on the Jets. I'm talking about the Seattle Seahawks kicker, Jason Myers. He is my kicker, and I have the Buffalo defense against Arizona, which probably means I should change that out. But at the same time, defenses, they're in the AFC East. There's not that many better defensive situations than having to go up against the Jets a few times. Now, Miami is different now, but New England's offense is very wishy-washy, right? Very susceptible to being not good. So you never really know. But if I were to look for some quality defenses on the waiver wire, there's not too many to look for, right? So maybe the Rams against Seattle, but I wouldn't trust that. There's just not all the defenses are not there that you want to have. And that's just basically it. So I might as well just keep what I have going on. And I definitely don't want to mess around with Detroit's defense, even though they're going up against Washington with Alex Smith, who is a check down master, which is why you probably should be looking at McKissick to go get. That's a stay away from me for the most part. So that's my Yahoo League. I'm 6 out of 10. I'm in playoff projections right now. All good. I've lost 2 straight in my ESPN league, where my team, as of right now, as it stands, is Tua Tagovailoa, Alvin Kamara, Ronald Jones II, Michael Thomas, Mr. Mooney for Chicago, Daryl Mooney, Austin Hooper, KJ Hamler. The Vikings defense this week changed it up. I've been rocking with the Kansas City defense all year long until this week. And I have Mr. Joey Sly, bench Cam Akers, I can't give up, AJ Green, who I won't drop, Keenan Cole Sr., Michael Pittman Jr., Taysom Hill, because I can't not have him at this point, Jeremy Grant, who may end up sliding in my flex at some point, and I have Matt Breida, just in case, the Ronald Jones experience just hurts me too bad. But that's my roster. I'm going up against a guy who also took a loss last week. We're kind of neck and neck in this situation right now. He has a guy who needs to be put in the starting lineup in T. Higgins, but he may be actually leaving him on the bench because he's going up against Pittsburgh, whose defense is legitimate for sure. But he has Tom Brady, Chris Carson, Rex Burkhead, Terry McLaurin, Sterling Shepard, Rob Gronkowski, who had a bad game last week. But before that, it was like 17, 15, 16. He was going crazy. 18, 17, 14. Those were his PPR, 1-point PPR statistics. He was having a ball, man. He was doing it all. He has Mr. Travis Fulgham, who has risen as one of the Eagles' #1 targets. He has Tennessee's defense, which it shouldn't backfire on him because Indianapolis' offense is pretty stale. Like, I wouldn't be happy to have Indy's offense right now. And some of it's Phillip Rivers, some of it is just execution. We've seen Indianapolis be able to put points on the board in different ways, but they just can't get their wide receivers involved at all. And we'll talk about that a little bit later too. But he has Ryan Suckup as his kicker. As far as my league standings are concerned, I am tied for third place in my standings on the east side of the division. And it's a 3-way tie, of course, for 5 and 4. So I've lost 2 straight, not feeling good about it personally, but you have to carry on. As far as the playoffs are concerned, I'm still hanging on by a thread. I will be facing the number 1 overall seed in an 8-team playoff, and hopefully I come out with a win so I can upgrade my chances. But honestly, playoff seeding means nothing to me. Like, of course, I wouldn't want to go up against the number 1 seeded guy just because this team makeup is very strong. He has Kyler Murray, Miles Sanders, Joe Mixon, who doesn't look like he's going to play. So he's going to have to bench him. But he has A.J. Brown, who's been on a tear. Tyler Lockett, who can go off at any moment. He does have Mark Andrews, who is going to basically... Mark Andrews is like the guy who you just hope for all the time to do something, and he never does. Tyler Boyd, the Packers defense, and Mr. Bullock, Mr. Randy Bullock, that's the kicker. On his bench, he has Josh Kelly, Corey Davis, Jacoby Myers, Tim Patrick, Troymaine Pope, who, potentially could get some good looks because of an injured Mike Williams. Also, he has Nick Chubb on IR. So, there you go. And he's projected to actually play. So, there you go. So, he's been practicing without a brace recently, as of today, which I'm recording. This is Thursday. And by all accounts, he's looked good at returning to practice. And now that he's managed to shed off the knee brace, and that's another positive sign, the Browns are expected to decide whether to activate him from injured reserve in time to play for Week 10 on Friday. And that is, that's a good sign for the Browns and for just how Baker Mayfield is going to be able to play now, which hopefully will help Austin Hooper be the number 1 option in this very barren pass offense that is Cleveland Browns. So hopefully that helps me out. But his team is really good. He has a really solid team. No misses basically anywhere else. And the top 2 teams basically have no misses. So the guy who I lost to really badly last week has, James Conner, Devontae. He has Tyreek Hill. There's been a lot of trades. He has Deshaun Watson. Basically, if you ended up getting one of these superstar quarterbacks, which I did have, and I was surging till, Dak's ankle was broken, and it was just a tough scene. Ever since that day, it's just been an uphill battle ever since. And as such, things have definitely been getting rough for me in that league, but we fight on. We continue to fight. Being 1 game back, it's not horrific. And if we look at some of the matchups that I have going on here, that I'm looking for at least, there's some games that some guys can possibly steal from. The second guy who's ahead of me in my division, who is 6-3, 1 or 2. 6-3. So that guy has to go up against a guy with Derrick Henry, Josh Jacobs, DK, Marvin Jones Jr., Hunter Henry, Leonard Fournette. That's a solid team. He also has Will Fuller, who's on his bench currently. And honestly, I would probably, at this point, I might start Will Fuller over him because he's just been going off like that. Will Fuller has a tendency to do great things. He also does Deebo Samuel. He has a really solid team, and he could fight for sure. And that's the biggest thing. If your team can fight, you can win. That's how I think about it, at least. And he's going, and then the number one guy is going up against Lamar. And if Lamar can figure some things out, I think Lamar is tired of the media coming after him. He might have a really big game this week. Lamar, Dalvin. So he has to go up against Dalvin Cook. He has McKinnon, who is going up against the Saints. So that might be tough. He has Brandon Cooks, who's been really solid as of late. Jerry Jeudy, who's starting to turn it on. He's going up against a Las Vegas Raiders defense who honestly doesn't stop too many people anyway. As we see, Justin Herbert drove right down the field on him a couple times. And probably the only reason why the Chargers didn't secure that win to secure the win or get to overtime was probably because they knocked him out the game for like a couple plays. TJ Hawkinson, he has, who has been basically the third best tight end besides Darren Waller and Travis Kelce. He has Curtis Samuel, Mason Crosby, and then the Chicago Bears defense. And Christian Kirk is on his bench, who has been really good. And he has Devontae Parker. So his team is really peaking at a really good time. And everybody's just kind of becoming a stronger version of themselves at any given moment. But we're going to take a break and we're going to get into $2. What was it? I don't even remember the name, man. We're getting into some $2 picks. We'll keep it simple. $2 picks coming up, GSMC. Do you always feel like you're on E all the time? You always feel like you're always on, running and running and running. And what do you do when you need a moment to chill? Like, how would you like to hit the reset button and get ready for what's next? Well, there's only really one beer out there that's literally made to chill, and that is Coors Light. Coors Light wants you to know that no matter what sport is on this fall, Saturdays are your time to chill. I always have a Coors Light ready for me right when it's time to watch my Sunday games, prepare for fantasy football. I like Coors Light a lot. In fact, I would dare say I love Coors Light. And I think you should try it out, man. Coors Light makes watching football super therapeutic, and with minimal, college football teams playing this year, Coors Light wants fans to know that there's still plenty of teams out there and plenty of sports that allow them to relax and enjoy a beer. So Coors Light is the beer that I choose when I need to unwind. So when you want to get there, hit the reset, reach for the beer that is made to chill. Get Coors Light in the new look delivered straight to your door at get.coorslight.com. Celebrate responsibly. Coors Brewing Company, Golden, Colorado.
Are you looking for the very best NFL and college football podcast? Then check out the GSMC Football Podcast. Get the latest football news both on and off the field. From the NFL Draft to trades to the rumor mill to the NFL Combines, they got you covered. That's GSMCpodcast.com/football-podcast. Get updates on college rivalries, game day insights, and much, much more. It's football talk the way you want it. This show eats, sleeps, and breathes football. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, GSMC Fantasy Football people, we're back, and we're getting into our $2 extravaganza, our $2 mega fest, whatever we call it, our MKF $2 double-rinos, whatever you want to call it, I guess. But we are about to get and embark on some daily fantasy sports action, and of course we have to get ready. We're going to put $2 here on a couple games, and we'll see how we do. I'm going to do full games because I don't really feel like halftime bets are my thing until, of course, the second half goes. I got to watch them before it goes. So let's say Thursday night. So by the time you hear this, we'll know the result. But I think that a Thursday night game, we have a Phillip Rivers versus a Ryan Tannehill. Tannehill's defense, or should I say the Titans' defense, is not very good. And Phillip Rivers likes to do two things: throw to his running backs and hand the ball off to his running backs and get his tight ends involved. So I guess three things. if the Colts control this game at the line of scrimmage, I don't see Phillip Rivers throwing the ball that much. His line is 266.5. I'm going less. On that. Phillip Rivers is going to have to show me he wants to throw the ball. Ryan Tannehill's line is 245.5. We already know what the Titans enjoy doing for sure. We know what they're going to do. The only worry is, of course, A.J. Brown and Corey Davis respectively. They could have some really good games through the air, and all it takes is one chunk play to get it going. But if the Titans control the line of scrimmage and really run the ball and make it tough, and if this is just a run game, and if the run game is relevant for both teams, you got to stay low on both. So, I think that is worth the $2 right then and there. In my opinion, right? I think that's worth $2. That's a solid bet. So we'll go $2 there. And let's just keep on rolling. So, more games around. Washington at Detroit. Interesting thing. Matthew Stafford didn't have a great game. He got knocked out, of course, with concussion, but he had 2 interceptions before that. Not a lot of things were looking to be really good. And his line is 271 right now. He's going up against a Washington team that can really dial up some pressure from his front seven, and that always makes me worry. And they have this 3 for 3 right now. So I can put $2 on this. Alex Smith, 230.5 passing yards. And I'm feeling like that might be an over. Here's why. Antonio McKissick, or I'm sorry, not Antonio, that's Antonio Gibson, but McKissick is a receiving back. He's going to be there on third downs. He got 9 catches last week as soon as Alex Smith came in the game. He's going to throw the ball. It's up to how the players get the ball, like what they do after the catch. What that matters, they have a Terry McLaurin 81.5 yard receiving game, and I think he can get that. I think that's solid. I'm not a big fan of Detroit's defense. I'm not a big fan of Detroit as a team in general. And I think that he'll have to do more than this to keep it going. Stafford, on the other hand, Stafford is just slinging. And I think when he has Marvin Jones out there and he has these other guys who can run, I think he's going to sling it too. So I'm going to put more on every single person in this game, not necessarily expecting it to be a shootout. However, how I do feel about it is that it's going to be more competitive than you would think. And of course, I could be wrong, but this is just my realm of thinking about both of those teams. And moving on forward, we have one more $2 bet that I'm looking to make here. One more. And there's not a lot of great games around, so bear with it. But I'm thinking that we're going to get a good game. They have a Herbert and a Tua line that I think is just about as green as it comes. Justin Herbert is getting 300 passing yards in his sleep. The Miami Dolphins defense is pretty solid, as we know, but I don't think defenses are a detriment to Herbert's passing yard display. I think he can get solid passing yards all the time, and his line is 275.5. I think he can get to 280 pretty easily against Miami, considering that Kyler Murray could have gotten a lot more, but he does run a lot more, so they were more worried about his rushing ability and trying to keep him in the pocket, make him a pocket passer, which actually he's one of the better pocket passers in the league. Interesting fact. Kyler Murray, when he runs outside of the pocket, his passer rating is almost as bad as some of the worst in the league. Tua Tagovailoa has a line of 245.5, and I think that's doable. The Chargers are kind of beat up. We know that they have Joey Bosa. Right, that's understood. And we know that their cornerbacks can be pretty good. But I think that Tua Tagovailoa might have a really strong chance of doing some things here. And I think he likes to go up against guys, and he's a gamer. So I'm just going to say he can get 250. I feel confident in that. So I'm going to put those two in. Lock it in. How about that? So all of my upcoming $2 extravaganza bets for tonight's game. And basically when you hear this, yesterday's game. Phillip Rivers, I bet less on him, and his line was 266.5. Ryan Tannehill, 245.5. I went both less. $2 in. Hopefully I can make a little small change coming out. Then for 2 Sunday games, I have a early game and I have a late game. I went more on Matthew Stafford passing yards. I went more on Alex Smith passing yards, and I went more on McLaurin receiving yards, where McLaurin is 81.5. Alex Smith is 230.5 passing yards, and Matthew Stafford is 271.5 passing yards. And then I have the late game where I went, of course, more on Justin Herbert for 275.5, and I have more on 245.5 for Tua Tagovailoa. And that is your little $2 extravaganza right there. So I had a little thought exercise the other day that I was thinking about 2 things. Number one, I wanted to think about who are some of the better receivers that we have in the league right now and who's playing. And for fantasy purposes, who are like some guys that are just so on a different level that you kind of just don't want to deal with on a weekly basis. Because I've gone up against 2 of them already. I think Devontae Adams has solidified himself not only as the best fantasy wide receiver this year, but he might as well be the best wide receiver this year. He made the 49ers secondary look like, a low-end D1 school. They didn't know what to do with him. He literally was tap dancing around. He was doing juke moves. He didn't respect them 100% of the time. It was like he was toying with them. He could have had so much more fantasy points if he actually got in the end zone a couple times, but he was stopped basically at the 1-yard line 3 times in that game. So thanks for not making the beatdown that I received last week any worse. Tyreek Hill, of course, is a human cheat code as far as his ability to just completely torch defenses. And having Tyreek Hill, partnered with Patrick Mahomes is almost like a perfect marriage. A perfect marriage, really. And that Kansas City team has another guy. So it's really like an open relationship. It's a perfect open relationship right now. We have Patrick Mahomes, Tyreek, and Travis Kelce. Travis Kelce is not nearly as insane, but he is by far the best tight end in fantasy, and he's the best tight end in the league right now because George Kittle is hurt, and thus he just usurps everybody else on the planet. He is just that good. He is what people expected Jimmy Graham to really just flourish into, especially after the Saints trade, which, when Jimmy Graham was at his height, it felt like this, right? It felt like this, but it's another level here because he has somebody who can just completely sling the ball down the field. All the arm talent in the world from Patrick Mahomes. Really crazy. D-Hop is weird. I'm not necessarily afraid of DeAndre Hopkins. I don't like to see his name because I know his floor is really strong. But there's been times this season where I'm just like, where's D-Hop fantasy-wise? And we know what's happening, right? We know what's going on. He's drawing PIs. No points go for you or the defense or the offensive. Like any offensive player doesn't get any pass interference yardage. It's all nothing. It goes to nobody. And it's another reason why I just don't like it. I'm a big proponent of removing the spot of the foul pass interference call and just give them a 15-yard, like if it was roughing the passer or something like that. 15 yards, automatic first down. It's simple. Let people earn it, man. People don't earn their drives, right? You don't earn your drives by going down the field, being the most athletic receiver, like one of the top 3 most athletic receivers in the world. It's so hard to play cornerback. You grab a little bit of the arm going downfield, boom, they're already in field goal range. Like, what? Because of a small grab, we're in field goal range now? It's nonsense. And maybe this sounds weird coming from a Saints fan who has to constantly see pass interference calls that normally don't get called for other teams. I'll just go ahead and say it. Saints fans know what I'm saying. But on a real level here, it has to be a reset. And I think doing something like that would... The reason why they won't do it, should I say, is because it would slow the game down and it would keep drives out there way longer than people want it to be, and it would make teams really hard to score on, and they like scores. They like big points. They like big-time plays, and, you know, I understand. It's the same reason why we don't get holding calls as much this year, and honestly, I don't miss holding calls. I don't miss seeing, 4 or 5, 6 holding calls a game. Like, that sucks. No one likes holding calls. No one likes hands in the face calls. Like, let's let them be. Like, one of the biggest non-hands in the face calls that I saw, Cam Jordan definitely had a hand in the face at Tom Brady when he threw a horrible pass, and it was a horrible throw. And that was just the end of it. That was the start of a real big beatdown on that week in last week's game against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and it just wasn't called. Like, you can see it on the replay. Maybe the refs didn't see it, but I haven't really seen hands in the face get called too much, and I think they're just letting people play just to keep offenses going, and I think in turn it's helping a little bit of the defense fire off a little bit more too, because they're not doing defensive holding as much as far as, like, of course, like DBs, they get it a lot, but at the line of scrimmage, man, they're letting people fight. They're letting people push around. The rub route thing is still apparent in the league. Rules are really affecting a lot of different things for fantasy this year, which will be interesting to see how the NFL handles next season, because I really don't know if they can revert back to calling, offensive holdings, like holding on offense, the offensive linemen play. For the most part, they're just letting them go at it, and as long as it's not overly egregious, they're just going to let them play. And I think what it's done, it just made the game a lot smoother. It keeps the game going, and that's a positive change. I just would like to see more positive changes. Maybe it's a counterbalance, right? Maybe we get our first 20-yard penalty. Maybe that would be better, because if somebody like Mahomes or anybody with like strong arm talent just wants to chuck it up there and say, "Hey man, go get it," and the DB has no choice but to basically hold on for dear life or give up a touchdown, he's got to hold on for dear life. And I guess the counter argument to that is the fact that if you don't pass interfere, the realistic thing is the guy would probably get a really long gain and potentially score. That's the biggest reason why people say, yeah, they do deserve to have the spot where the foul occurred. But the points go to no one, so fantasy players probably don't care. GSMC, we're going to take another break, and we'll come back. We're going to talk matchup mania for the remainder of the podcast, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Check out the show that's built on the MMA, from the UFC to extreme cage fighting. They got the fights covered. Check out the GSMC MMA podcast. Get the latest news on past or upcoming fights. Join us as we talk to and about some of the biggest names in the MMA, past, present, and future. When it's the fight game, there's just one show to check out. GSMCpodcast.com/MMA-podcast. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit GSMCpodcast.com for more info.
All right, we are going to get into some stardoms and sit-ems for Week 10. We got some sleepers and some busts too coming up. So, who to start for quarterbacks regular starts, of course, are Aaron Rodgers, who is going up against the Jacksonville Jaguars, Russell Wilson against the LA Rams, Kyler Murray against Buffalo, Deshaun against Cleveland, and Josh Allen against Arizona. A strong start is Lamar Jackson at New England. So the Patriots struggled with former Raven Joe Flacco giving up big plays in the passing game, while also whittling against the run. And this should help fit Jackson out of the slump that will put him back into the QB1 conversation. So this would be a really good chance for Lamar to get a nice tune-up game. And it'll be fun to see him go up against Cam Newton, who, in some ways, they're not similar players, right? They have differences, but they kind of get the same level of media treatment in some regards as far as how people view them, which is strange, but that's a conversation for another day. I just think it's really cool to see two guys, especially two black quarterbacks, go up against each other, and they kind of do it their own way. They have their own style. They're very unique, very charismatic people. So it'll be fun. It'll be a fun game. Drew Brees versus San Francisco. So Brees should go to work against a really bad pass defense, just like Aaron Rodgers did. And that would make my year so much easier if Drew Brees can cook like he did last week, get Michael Thomas more involved, get Alvin Kamara going off fast. And you can clearly see teams are keying in on stopping Alvin Kamara before anybody else. And if you start really going after the flat routes, Drew Brees is showing that he's going to throw it. And it may not be the most oomph on the ball, right? There might be some hot air balloons out there, but he's going to throw it. And he has really good receiving core as long as they're healthy. Jared Goff versus Seattle. So Goff should throw a high volume opposite Russell Wilson, and the Seahawks cannot cover his wide receivers anywhere on the field. We all know this. If you have anybody going up against Seattle, you start them because it's almost a guarantee it's going to be. They say Justin Herbert is an interesting start, who we just talked about for the $2 extravaganza. And they say it's a bit tricky against the Dolphins defense. That can be nasty at home, but Herbert keeps putting numbers up with his aggressive play style, So believe in Herbert. Trust in the Herb. Herbie fully loaded. Trust in him. Tom Brady versus Carolina. So this should have a strong running on their side of the week to make Brady more comfortable with play action shots to his talented wide receivers. As you know, Carolina's a very young defense, but they have shown signs that they can be really good. However, if they can run the ball early and often, play action might really help out Tom Brady and his new wide receiver toy, Antonio Brown, get more chemistry going. Big Ben should be cleared to play, and he's a good bet for 250 yards and 2 touchdowns against Cincinnati as his floor, because Cincinnati's defense is arguably just as bad as any going on in the league. And as far as daily fantasy bargains, Tua Tagovailoa versus the LA Chargers, $5,600 on DraftKings, $6,800 on FanDuel. The Chargers secondary is pretty vulnerable right now, and their pass rush isn't really the same as of late. Tagovailoa will have another solid day in his second home start. Baker Mayfield is going up against Houston, who's a $6,000 on DraftKings and $7,000 on FanDuel. And make sure he's cleared to play through the COVID protocols, but he should be doing a really good job, throwing the ball opposite of Deshaun Watson coming off the bye. Some deep streamers would be Derek Carr versus Derek Carr versus Denver, Drew Lock versus the Raiders, Nick Foles versus Minnesota. So those are your deep sleepers. When it comes to who to sit down, they're saying Joe Burrow must sit. The numbers say that the Steelers' pass defense is having issues, but they'll be motivated to play better at home to bury Burrow behind his shaky O-line, and Minkah Fitzpatrick can also cause problems with his inside coverage. We all understand. So if he's going to be going up against Tyler Boyd, who has been one of Joe Burrow's favorite options out there, then that might be a tough game. Then we're going with Carson Wentz against New York, and he could probably grind to a possible, like a decent day, a passable day. But the Giants can really limit that damage, and the Giants have been playing pretty well over the past few weeks. They look like they're getting things together, and I think Joe Judge is coaching them up as best as he can with what he has going on. I don't know if that means I don't think Daniel Jones is their guy for the remainder of I don't think they're building around Daniel Jones, but they're showing a lot of fight, a lot of heart, and their offensive line is getting better. Kirk Cousins, they should stick to a run-heavy game plan, of course, and this matchup isn't very favorable for anywhere in the passing game production, so that's probably meaning that you have some bad news for wide receivers coming up too. Ryan Tannehill versus Indianapolis. So the Colts contained Lamar Jackson's passing and athleticism last week, and Tannehill is in for another underwhelming night. So that's why I definitely went under. Teddy Bridgewater. So the Bucs blitzing will be more effective against Bridgewater, who is quieted after surprising in Kansas City, whose defense is not nearly as aggressive. And Matthew Stafford versus Washington. So we'll see if Stafford goes, but you can only do so much anyway, assuming that he has no Kenny Golladay again. But I also believe that helps him because he's just going to throw. Some deep traps would be Cam Newton versus Baltimore, Jake Luton versus Green Bay, Daniel Jones versus Philadelphia. So probably want to stay back. Regular starts for running back. Alvin Kamara versus San Francisco. Dalvin Cook versus the Chicago Bears. Aaron Jones versus Jacksonville. Derrick Henry versus Indianapolis. James Robinson versus Green Bay. James Conner versus Cincinnati. Miles Sanders, if he returns, which he will be, versus New York. Josh Jacobs versus Denver. Nick Chubb, if he returns, which looks like he's on pace to. And Kareem Hunt versus Houston. Chase Edmonds versus Buffalo. And Joe Mixon, if he returns, at Pittsburgh. But for so far, it sounds like he's out. Some strong starts. Chris Carson, he should be returning from his foot injury this week, and you should not have any hesitation in putting him back because Seattle needs him badly to control the clock more. So they're definitely probably going to tone down on the let Russ cook era. About time. I said this a while ago that Russell Wilson's run, even though I have him in fantasy, was not going to be sustainable because they can't win games that way with a defense that bad. Antonio Gibson against Detroit. So he was a terrific matchup, and even sudden split with J.D. McKissick doesn't hurt too much because of his touchdown potential. McKissick is also considered in deep PPR formats, of course. DeAndre Swift versus Washington. So by the numbers, Washington isn't bad against the run, but his volume is starting to go back up, and you can get it done as a receiver and scorer, even with limited rushing yardage. Zach Moss and Delvin Singletary versus Arizona. The Bills should want to run a little bit more this week, and Moss is secure anyway because of his key catches and red zone scoring chances. Singletary is more of a consideration for PPR, although I would probably stay away from Delvin Singletary with a 10-foot pole because Zach Moss just seems to be the guy who's getting all the meaningful touches. They have Jonathan Taylor on here. He did score last week despite a costly fumble, and this matchup should seem to be in his favor as a running style a little bit more than Jordan Wilkins, who has more of a boom or bust feel in the backfield. But mark my words, don't be surprised if Jonathan Taylor disappoints you again, because that's just something that he likes to do. That's just something that Jonathan Taylor likes to do because he doesn't have back vision right now. It didn't come installed, right? Shout out to those who were able to get a next-gen console if you play video games. Had to put that in there. So if he doesn't have vision installed on his console yet, maybe he'll get the firmware update soon. Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins at New England. Patriots' run defense is reeling, and the Ravens should be relentless to get the ball in the hands of their young running backs, as Mark Ingram still may miss another week. Phillip Lindsay versus the Raiders. So the backfield touches have become more committee-like, as Lindsay has been the better, more explosive runner than Melvin Gordon. He should excel in this excellent matchup. And Wayne Gallman, he's hard to trust for big yardage, but he is seeing the ball near the goal line enough to think that he can sneak away to 50 yards and score a touchdown if Devonta Freeman is still going to be out. here are some daily fantasy sports bargains. Duke Johnson, of course, so there's a good chance David Johnson misses the game with a concussion, which is setting up to be a nice high-volume revenge game for Duke Johnson going up against Cleveland, who is $5K on DraftKings and $5.8K on FanDuel. Leonard Fournette, so it's hard to believe anymore in Ronald Jones, but Fournette, who was a force in the first matchup against the Panthers, could rumble for another big day with a boost from receiving production. So he is 5.5K and 6.4K respectively between DraftKings and FanDuel. Wow. So who to sit for running backs? Mike Davis. So he has been superb for Christian McCaffrey, or he's been super sub for Christian McCaffrey before, but the Bucs will probably swarm against the run again and also contain him as a receiver out the backfield. So saying you might need to sit him. Jared McKinnon, who I talked about, you probably would want to sit. It's hard to trust him or JaMychal Hasty, and it's pretty much become a touchdown-dependent backfield, and the Saints are tough up front for sure. Melvin Gordon, Phillip Lindsay is the Denver back of choice to deploy now, even in a good spot against the Raiders. All the Rams running backs, they could mix it up after the bye between the three running backs, so avoid if you can, and Seattle are much better versus the run than they are against the pass, which might mean that, you might see some Darrell Henderson action. I don't care anymore about that. He's off my team. I can't deal with it anymore. Still have Cam Akers because I'm hoping. That's all it is. All the Chargers running backs you probably want to avoid. They're all random. Are they getting so random that you just want to kind of move past it? Kalen Ballage may have a nice revenge game narrative, but, athletic guy, but never really could put it all together. Last week was his biggest, maybe kind of game in a while. So I'd probably stay away too. They say all the Patriots running backs versus Baltimore. Sony Michel is coming back from a quad injury as Damian Harris goes back down on the chest issue. Rex Burkhead and James White complicate things as well, and the matchup isn't really that great. Take a flyer on anybody. And then all Dolphins running backs too. So Salvon Ahmed and Jordan Howard didn't do too much against the Cardinals, and the Chargers have become much weaker through the air than they are on the ground. So moving on from there, wide receivers, regular starts. Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins, Michael Thomas, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett. Mike Evans and Chris Godwin, Allen Robinson, A.J. Brown, DJ Moore and Robbie Anderson, Stephon Diggs, Keenan Allen, Adam Thielen, and Justin Jefferson, which is interesting. Terry McLaurin, Will Fuller, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, Brandon Ayuk, Tyler Boyd, Travis Fulgham, and DJ Shark. So stronger starts. Juju Smith and Deontay Johnson, they should stay busy for Big Ben as they're going up against a weak Cincinnati defense. Devontae Parker against the L.A. Chargers. The Chargers secondary was elite last season, but it's not the case this season. Parker has also been warming up with Tua, and Preston Williams is dinged up. Mike Williams can play the role of Christian Kirk, making big plays away from Keenan Allen. Christian Kirk, and he keeps playing himself as he can get open down the field, stretch things out with Tre'Davious White or a double team on DeAndre Hopkins. Marquise Brown. So people are still thinking that he's got it. I don't believe it, but he might be one. Jarvis Landry and Rashad Higgins. So they should keep busy against helping Baker Mayfield, trying to counter what Deshaun Watson does with Will Fuller and others. Darnell Mooney. So the Vikings struggle most with speed receivers, so he's the best bet to deliver with Allen Robinson next to him. Antonio Brown, he's getting more volume than expected immediately from Tom Brady, and it should pay off with a score in a rebound game. Curtis Samuel has looked really good, especially, and he could go back to cooling off, but it's more likely he'll keep cutting into Robbie Anderson and DJ Moore's production. Nelson Aguilar has been coming back to life recently, as the former Eagle does, is fly around and make big plays that Henry Ruggs is supposed to be making for Derek Carr. Some bargains for daily fantasy sports. Brandon Cooks is at 5.6 on DraftKings, 6.3 on FanDuel. He's cooking with gas, unleashed with Deshaun Watson, and the Browns have no answers probably for him. Chase Claypool, who is 5.8 on DraftKings and 6.1 on FanDuel. And they should move him around well inside and outside to get him some red zone looks along with a 6-4-60 type of line potentially. And then Jerry Jeudy, who is 5.6 on DraftKings and 5.8 on FanDuel. And, we're not trying to chase points here, but Jeudy is getting hot because of Drew Lock, and he'll stay productive working alongside him for sure. We're going to take our final break, and we're going to move on to who to sit for wide receivers and move the tight ends and so much more. GSMC.
Check out the show built around the women of MMA. From the UFC to the extreme cage fighting, we got the fights covered.
Listen.
It's the Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast. The latest news of upcoming fights, discussions of previous matches. Join us as we talk to and about the biggest names in women's mixed martial arts, past, present, and future. When it's the women's fight game, you know where to listen to. The Golden State Media Concepts Women's MMA Podcast.
All right, we're getting back into it. Fantasy football, Week 10 fantasy stuff. Who are we going to sit for wide receivers this week? Marvin Jones. So Washington stymied the Giants wideouts last week, and with no Kenny Golladay drawing attention, hurts him here, and it's somebody you probably want to leave alone. AJ Green and T. Higgins are some people that you probably want to sit down because the Steelers will contain what they do outside around Tyler Boyd because of pressure up front. Darius Slayton and Sterling Shepard are probably people you want to sit because the Eagles will be better equipped to pressure Daniel Jones and handle these receivers down. Field Emmanuel Sanders, they're getting versatile throwing the ball around, so don't buy into him having a particularly notable revenge game, potentially. Corey Davis, he was blanketed last week, and the matchup is just as tough this week, so the touches may not come his way. Cole Beasley, so the Cardinals have been weak in the slot, but Josh Allen keeps looking aggressively deep outside, so that might be one of those things where you might be reading into something, but I think Cole Beasley is one of Josh Allen's more favorite targets, so he may still have a good game. All the Colts, sit them down. They're not good right now. The Colts are not good. Jacoby Myers, he'll cool off against a much tougher secondary than the Jets, of course, going up against Baltimore. So stay away. Who to start for tight end? So regular starts, of course, Darren Waller, TJ Hawkinson, Rob Gronkowski, Mark Andrews, unfortunately, Evan Ingram, Dallas Goedert. So stronger starts, Noah Fant. So Fant will be in the position to have himself with Albert O down for the season, and he should get revved up against the Raiders, who should have been given up a bigger game to Chargers tight ends. Eric Ebron. So he keeps getting love all over the field and scored a fun play last week. It doesn't hurt that the Bengals struggle against that position too. Hunter Henry should have a good game against Miami. He nearly scored multiple times on the Raiders, and he'll hit pay dirt here too, potentially. Jordan Reed, so he should be healthier to become a key target for Nick Mullins, and the Saints don't really cover the position well this year. That's truth. We're not the best tight end coverage. However, we did see some good coverages on Gronk. Granted, it is Gronkowski, who is kind of an older guy. Jimmy Graham, he's red hot right now. The Vikings can struggle covering tight ends as much as receivers because their secondary is very weak and it's not doing too well. Robert Tonyan, he keeps splitting work with others, but he should have a big scoring play against a bad tight end defense in Jacksonville. Austin Hooper is the bargain play this week. And I also have him starting this week for me too, but he is 3.9 on DraftKings and he is 5K on FanDuel, and he will return from his appendicitis and will be busy right away in a good matchup helping Jarvis Landry and Rashard Higgins without OBJ in the lineup helping him out. So moving on forward, we go to who to sit for tight ends this week. Jared Cook, surprisingly. The 49ers are nasty against the position, and it's a rough game against the Buccaneers for sure. Jonnu Smith is next here for the Titans. He scored last week, but he still did need a little less work. He needed a little bit more work than Anthony Firsker, and the Colts cover the position better than pretty much anyone else in the league. So got to watch out for that. Logan Thomas, the quarterback change to Alex Smith, changes the pecking order of receivers, and it doesn't really favor Logan Thomas. All the Texans tight ends, Darren Fells and Jordan Atkins committee isn't very helpful to anyone. Trust me, I've experienced it myself. And all of the Rams, Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee, this is more like Robert Woods in the Cooper Kupp game. And for the Colts, Trey Burton or Mo Cox, roll the dice, and you'll probably still are going to get burned. As far as defenses go, right? You got to talk about the defense. Defense wins championships, right? Steelers are a strong start. Ravens, the Bears are a strong start. The Eagles, the Packers, the Saints, Titans, Giants, Dolphins, and Buccaneers. The Lions are a bargain versus Washington, who is 2.6 on DraftKings, 3.9 on FanDuel. The Lions need to have a strong defensive outing at home, and getting the sudden turnover-prone Alex Smith behind a shaky line helps them if they can get a lead. Some of the weaker starts, of course, are the Rams, Washington, the Colts, Vikings, Cardinals, Bills, Patriots, Raiders, and the Browns. So that's all your startums and situms for Week 10 right there in the flesh. Here we go. So I'm going to wrap up the rest of this podcast, probably reflecting on what Week 10 and what the past first 10 weeks of the season is. This is kind of like a checkpoint that shows you where you are as far as your season. You could be really in the fight, in the thick of it, like I am per se, if you're in a seasonal league and you've been going through so many different things, injuries, COVID, which are kind of like the same thing in a sense, but COVID's kind of been taken in a weird direction right now that I am not even sure how I'm going to talk about it per se. Like, we're seeing whole college games get suspended or canceled, and it's getting out of control as Halloween really put a damper on a lot of stuff. And I think the NFL is trying to handle this as best as they can. But as you can see, COVID is really taking over not only sports, but back in the U.S. as well. It's just been surging nonstop, and it's making things difficult. So salute to those who are still able to, keep grinding and keep playing fantasy football, because, we were worried how this would work out. We would think that all these teams would have to move games and stuff like that. But the NFL has tried their best to move games back and have some allowed it time to enable to switch some things around. But also, we're basically getting to the point to where that can't happen too much. They can't push games back. They can't use teams' bye weeks as freely as they could have a few weeks prior to. So now it's getting kind of dangerous. If there's a big outbreak for a team like the Titans had a few weeks back, then we might see some real struggles here. But I will say what's interesting about the Titans is they don't look like a real contender right now anymore to me. I think the Titans are a bit of a pretender team. When they came back, of course, when they started out with the 4-0 thing or 3-0, and they came and they just kept winning games. And of course, they played like 3 games in like 16, 17 days, which is pretty tough. But at the same time, they have not looked as strong. We all understand that Derrick Henry gets stronger as the season goes along. We hear that all the time. But, they have really bad defense right now. Their defense is pretty bad. They have no pass rush. They paid for Vic Beasley, who they let go, who has been cut twice now in a year. And they had picked up Jadeveon Clowney, who has not gotten 1 sack this year. So as a Saints fan, I'm like, woo, we passed the bullet, because Trey Henderson has 7.5 on his own right now. He's playing phenomenal defense. But yeah, I don't think that they're a real contender. And I got to say it. I've been saying it for a little while. As much as I like Russell Wilson, as much as I enjoy seeing DK Metcalf flourish, as he was one of my greater achievements in calling just what I was seeing, that team is a pretender, because that defense is so bad that Russell Wilson is having to make decisions that he doesn't want to make. And now they have no choice but to kind of reel it back in, because if they score they can't keep getting in shootouts, because eventually teams are going to know, or teams with better defenses, way better defenses than them, are going to eventually get stops on Russell Wilson. And once that happens and their defense can't get a stop on a soul, it's over with. Personally, that's how I see it. It's over with. I don't know if they make it out of their own division, if things keep going the way they are, personally. So I have no clue what Seattle plans to do. Trade deadline is done, but I just don't know, man. That Seattle defense is so horrific. It's so bad, so bad. But yeah, I think some real contenders, though, are kind of the same that we've seen all along in the first place, right? So let's keep this in mind. The Ravens are being talked about as if they are a 2-5 team. They are like 5-2. I'm sorry, they're like 5-3 or 6-3. Sorry, they won last week, so they're 6-2, right? This is a really good team. Their defense arguably is the best in the league. I sometimes feel like they're best in the league. And they've just ran up against a tough Steelers team. Lamar didn't have the best game. Lamar hasn't played nearly as good as his MVP year. But if you look at his numbers, they're not as in particularly horrible as people might make it seem. It's just that teams know what they're going to do. And it's up to that offensive scheme or offensive coaching staff to start scheming up some more creative plays to get his weapons like Mark Andrews, who should be phenomenal, Marquise Hollywood Brown, who is a speedster who can do some things with his legs. Willie Snead is still there. We understand J.K. Dobbins can ball. J.K. Dobbins is a gamer, right? So it's wonderful stuff that can happen eventually, but they're just it's been stagnant, and you would have thought they could figure it out by now. And maybe sometimes, at a certain point, we think a team is who they are. And I was feeling that way about the Saints until Sunday when they beat the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and beat the brakes off of them, right? I don't really know who teams are in the NFL. It's all about matchups at this point. But I know something is real, and that is defense. That defense is real, and it's been real for 10 straight weeks. That's the contenders' defense, because their offense, as long as they don't turn the ball over and control clock, it's really hard to beat them. Unless you're the Kansas City Chiefs. Kansas City Chiefs are the best team in the league, and it's not just because of Mahomes and them. It's just that you can tell that they haven't reached their full potential yet. And they're getting better and better scoring the ball every week. Is getting crazy. Their strength of schedule is not that strong. They do play New Orleans, who New Orleans seems like they might be peaking at a good time right now, getting healthy. So, and they added Quan Alexander, who should play this weekend. So that'll be interesting to see how he helps their linebacker core in the run, especially in the pass defense game, because one of the bigger things is that the Saints don't defend well against tight ends, but if they have a good time defending well against tight ends this week, it will probably be because of Malcolm Jenkins and Kawan Alexander. And that's a fact right there, man. That's a fact. I want to say the Saints are a contender. I say it to myself. It's kind of hard to believe, but definitely coming off of that Sunday night game, things have definitely changed for my feelings about the New Orleans Saints. I know nationally the topic is, wow, Tampa Bay just lost the game, but they're not saying New Orleans won it. It's a weird thing about how people handle New Orleans sports, but I like the Saints coming out of the NFC now. I needed to see a game like this. It makes sense. I am hoping and praying that Michael Thomas returns to his glory status, or maybe Alvin Kamara has a really good game again and starts getting more involved in that offensive player of the year conversation that he's rightfully being talked about in. Wouldn't that be crazy? 2 offensive player of the years on the same team back to back? That'd be insane. But wrapping it up here, GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast here. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe to the podcast. Find us on social media, Twitter and Facebook, GSMC Fantasy Football. to hear all the news, topics, discussions, and things from me, myself, and other fantasy football talkers here at the GSMC. Season signing out. I will see you all Tuesday to talk what happened on Sunday. Peace out.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Fantasy Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.